And then, hi everybody, welcome to this APHA Chesapeake Chapter events. Mark Samuels Lasner. I'm just gonna go ahead and let him take it away.
Okay, are you still seeing the spirit box that's come up in front?
No. I do not.
Okay, as long as you're not seeing, there's a dialogue, fine. Okay, good evening, everyone.
Hello.
I am delighted to give a kind of impromptu talk for the Chesapeake chapter of the American Printing History Association. And as usual, my topic is my favorite one, that is myself. I have used a presentation title, which is a little boastful, but I doubt there is much competition to be the foremost blind typographer in the world. Yes, that's good. I was born in 1952, a premature baby, with a severe vision disability, both eyes. And I've spent most of my life trying to live just like everybody else. There are a number of things I can't do, which I wish I could do. I can't drive a car. I can't really play sports. And looking at landscape means absolutely nothing to me. But from an early age, I could enjoy the world of print. Books were something I could pick up, manipulate, and enjoy over and over again. In fact, all printed matter. I could bring these close to my eyes, and until I was in my 40s, I could read any print, no matter how small, as long as it was close enough, including the Manhattan Telephone Directory. I think that my experience with books and printed matter led me to appreciate the typography and design of such works more than most people. If something was readable for me, it probably was pretty good typography. I didn't, of course, know this. I just knew there were books that were easier to read than others. There were typefaces that I could deal with. It was a serif typeface, that was always a plus. If it were italics, well, that wasn't so good. Sans serif, depends. And once you got into ornamental typefaces and advertising, well, that could be a problem from time to time. By the time I was a teenager, I was already interested in the history of books and the history of printing, particularly through the work of William Morris and the Kelmscott Press and all kinds of Victorian writers and artists. You will mostly know that I've spent a lot of my life collecting those people. And by the time I was in college, I had acquired a number of books by the printers that I admired, including Elbert Hubbard, the Roycroft Shop. Here's his book, Little Journeys to the Home of William Morris, whom he never met, though he claimed to. And a tiny Kelmscott Press volume, Gothic Architecture, which after 40 years out in the wilderness, has come back into the Mark Samuels Lasner collection. I was already kind of attuned to late 19th century printing, but I didn't really know anything about it. But I was willing to learn. And the way I learned was to join, first by joining the William Morris Society in the United States and meeting its leader, Joseph Dunlap, a librarian at City University of New York, who was a major collector of William Morris and 19th century printing, a historian of printing, and an expert on William Morris and everything to do with him. Joe Dunlap introduced me not only to the Kelmscott Press, but to Morris's other works, his writings on printing and book history. I got this expanded into the American followers of Morris, outlined in a wonderful book by Susan Otis Thompson. And what you see here on the left is one of Joe Dunlap's own publication, wonderfully titled The Book That Never Was, which is a study of an aborted project that Morris and his friend, the artist Edward Burne-Jones, planned in the 1860s, and it never came off. Through Joe Dunlap, I was introduced to printing and book history circles in New York City. And I was the second youngest person there, the inaugural meeting of the American Printing History Association in 1974. This was a momentous occasion for me because I was in a room with people who cared as much as I did about books, about printing, about type. And I absorbed a lot. One of the treats that happened because of belonging to the American Printing History Association and the William Morris Society was an invitation to join a group who went to visit J. Ben Lieberman and his wife Elizabeth in their suburban house in Mount Kisco, New York. Little did you know that in the living room of their home was William Morris's actual Kelmscott press, on which the famous Kelmscott Chaucer was printed. And this was my first experience at letterpress printing. We were all invited to set type with our name, and we printed a keepsake that said, Mark Samuels Lasner printed this on William Morris's Kelmscott press at the home of Ben and Elizabeth Lieberman. You will notice that on the top of the press, there is a Liberty Bell. That was not Morris's. That was put on by the Liebermans as a symbol of the freedom of the press. My first experience really with bookmaking came with a book that I co-edited with Roger Lewis, The Poems and Drawings of Elizabeth Siddal, produced by the Wombat Press, which was Lewis's invention. And here my role was really to be a co-editor and a facilitator. But we were working with a letterpress printer in London, to the John Roberts Press, and I got to play around with galleys, production proofs, and learn something about the way an actual book was produced. At the same time, I did my first actual bit of designing, a bookplate printed by the Thomas Todd Company in Boston, Massachusetts, reproducing Dante Gabriel Rossetti's frontispiece to his sister's Goblin Market. Of course, you can see that wombats are something I'm particularly interested in, care for. And I chose the typeface with my name, but I can't tell you what it is anymore. It was, ironically, the invention of technology, the digital age, that made a visually impaired person able to design publications. I couldn't have done it without it. And as soon as I saw the first Macintosh computer and something called MacWrite, I thought, this is like setting type. This is making words the way you want them to look. It was marvelous. There were about 6 typefaces, but you could make them italic or bold, and you could change the size. You could do all the things you could do with any other typographic system, and you could do it on a screen. And better than that, you could enlarge the screen. I was able to see these words and these letters, and it was a revelation. So of course, I bought a Macintosh computer and the really awful printer that came with it, called an image writer, that was a dot matrix printer, and would reluctantly print on ordinary stationery. It was really set up to print from reams of computer paper. But it was printing, and it was design, and it was mine. And it was just a marvelous revelation. But I didn't really do much with it because I really didn't know how. But I soon learned that you could print things off and you could fold them and staple them and make booklets. And that I did. This is the first thing I ever made, and you can see the terrible typeface out of the image writer, a preliminary checklist of the Max Beerbohm collection, run by Mark Samuels Lasner. This is from 1988. I soon learned that I could produce something on the computer and send it to an actual printer who could produce books or anything else via offset or other means. And here I was able to design a number of publications very early on. The first of these was England in the 1890s, literary publishing at the Bodley Head. This was done in Microsoft Word. And I don't want to show you the pages because they're so embarrassingly bad. But the cover was rather nice. And it brought in something that has been true for my entire career as an amateur typographer, what I would like to call elusive design. And of course, Aubrey Beardsley, great artist of the 1890s, is ideal for this. And you will see a couple of other things that have Beardsley connections later on. So I was able to take a Beardsley title page and scan it in some primitive means, and then insert a box with the lettering that you see on the front cover. I was also able to, with better typefaces and with a commercial printer in tow, produce a much nicer looking Beerbohm catalog for an exhibition at Princeton University in 1991. But these were rather simple things, and they were done with Microsoft Word, which was not in the late 1980s and early 1990s nearly as advanced as a page layout program as it is today. Stage 2 in my development as a maker of printed materials came very soon after, with the introduction of a number of wonderful new technologies. The first was the Apple Laser Writer, which produced 300 dots per inch, PostScript printing. 300 dots per inch was staggering, especially when you compared it to the dot matrix of the image writer. And it really looked like proper printing. Also introduced around the same time were a number of page layout programs. The one I used was Quark Express. And there was a wonderful moment when you could go to a computer store and there would be racks of boxes containing fonts. And these came on floppy disks. And here are a bunch of them. By the way, this photograph is courtesy of Jerry Kelly. I no longer have any of these floppy disks with fonts on them. But it was like going to the candy store. Go in there and there was something that says, Caslon or Janssen or Zaf Dingbats. And for, I don't know what, $45, you could take home this box, plug the disk into your floppy drive, copy the typefaces, and off you go. I found a number of typefaces that I particularly liked. One of them was Utopia, which was designed by Robert Slimbach and had the advantage of being as readable on the screen for me as it was on a page. It's a little clunky. It's not a terribly elegant typeface, but it was far better than trying to write something in Times Roman or, for God forbid, Helvetica. By this time, I had become the president, newsletter editor, secretary, treasurer, and God knows what else of the William Morris Society in the United States. And it was my responsibility to produce a quarterly newsletter, which I did in Quark Express using ITC Golden, a digital version of another version of the first typeface that Morris used at the Kelmscott Press. It's not the best Morris typeface. And I have to say that because I was always pressed for time, I didn't do much to make the design look very good. Interestingly enough, I received a letter from a member of the William Morris Society, complete with drawings of typefaces and sketches indicating the X height of the letters, telling me that William Morris would never have used the typeface that was present in the newsletter. He sort of missed the point. One of the features or lack of features of Morris's typefaces was there were no italics. So like the old New York Times, I had to put the titles of books or anything else within quotation marks. People complained about that too, but I would just tell them, well, if no italics is good for William Morris, it's good enough for the William Morris Society. My favorite typeface in the early 1990s was Matthew Carter's Galliard. It had unusually a very full set of characters. Most typefaces available at the time had a Roman in regular and maybe a semi-bold. They had an italic in a regular and semi-bold. And that was about it, with a full set of numbers and a very limited group of symbols. If you wanted a fleuron, if you wanted a raised dot, if you wanted something like that, well, it wasn't there. But Galliard had these features. So it became, in a sense, my house font. And I used it for a privately printed catalog of my collection, a very preliminary work. But it was lovely to use Galliard. And I always fantasized about commissioning Matthew Carter to design a typeface for me. I remember he told me that the alphabet cost a certain amount of money, but it was $30 for each additional symbol. Other projects at the time included a catalog for an exhibition with Kelmscott Press at the University of Miami, curated by B.J. Robinson, who has remained one of our very dear friends. I had not only designed the catalog, but I'd also lent a number of books to the exhibition. And this tells you one of the things that can happen when you are not paying enormous attention, is that I, of course, had sent various PDFs of the catalog sort of as proofs for correction. And I said, will you please give me the name of the company that is going to print this catalog? And they said, oh, we don't know that yet, or it was uncertain. And they eventually gave me the name of the company, but they printed the catalog from an earlier version. So in the colophon, you will see these two marks that show you where the name of the company was supposed to go. I don't know how many were printed, but the error was never corrected. More successful was the catalog for an exhibition at Harvard's Houghton Library, marking the centenary of the Yellow Book in 1994. And this was, of course, another bit of elusive Beardsley design. In fact, really making use of not only the yellow and black of the front cover of the Yellow Book, but as similar a typeface as I could find. Chapter 3 in my development as a typographer came a few years later when I moved from Quark Express to FrameMaker, which was then an independent company called Frame, bought by Adobe and renamed, of course, Adobe FrameMaker. FrameMaker was the best computer application I have ever used. It was, for me, a kind of golden age, because I was working on a number of bibliographical projects, including a bibliography never finished of Max Beerbohm, but other things. And it had the advantage being a document production application of being easy to write in, as if it were Microsoft Word, but equally capable of wonderful, nuanced design. It had several features which were unavailable in any other program. And I must say, I'm not sure some of them are available yet. These features, which were perfect for a bibliographer come designer, included a very sophisticated system for numbering and cross-references, so that if you could actually start a work like a bibliography, number several of the items, add a new item in between, and it would automatically change the numbers. It also updated the footnotes, and you could actually make cross-references to those item numbers within the application. Here you see on the left, a page from Selective Checklist of the published work of Aubrey Beardsley. And I should say there's a little joke here. There's an entry number 89, which is a book published under the pseudonym 89, A-T-E-Y-N-Y-N-E. And there is a footnote 89 that identifies the actual author of the book. The entry is, by the way, out of sequence, but I didn't care. On the right is an opening from the yellow book, a checklist and index. This was also a very complicated work with each volume of the yellow book laid out in its contents in their order of appearance, with a lot of footnotes. And then in the back, there is an index to all of these numbered items. FrameMaker made this possible and also allowed for the running, the sort of side heads that tell you which volume number you're in. Those were generated automatically. In 1996, one of my mentors as a designer, William Peterson, who is now Professor Emeritus of English at the University of Maryland, and I collaborated on a William Morris exhibition at the Grolier Club. And we independently produced publications. Bill's was a scholarly edition of Morris's Note on his aims in founding the Kelmscott Press. Mine was a checklist of what was on display at the Grolier. We agreed that we were going to be using Adobe Caslon, and we were going to use some ornaments, and that the two publications would be almost like a little match set. And here you see Bill's very substantial book on the left and my much thinner checklist on the right. William Morris, when asked what typeface one should use, said that Caslon was his choice and you could never go wrong with it. Adobe Caslon was like Galliard in that it had a full set of ornaments, numbers, and other features that few other typefaces had at the time. And another Grolier publication, which is the catalog for the Beatrix Potter exhibition held in 2001. And again, this is a bit of elusive design. You see in front of you, Beatrix, the first edition of Beatrix Potter's The Tale of Peter Rabbit. And the exhibition catalog was precisely the same, very modest size. We were afraid to illustrate anything because of the copyright uncertainties. But it turned out that the first edition of Peter Rabbit was never copyrighted in the United States, so that the four little rabbits could appear on the Grolier Club catalog's title page. I don't remember what year it was that Apple moved from System 9 to System 10. But at that moment, Adobe, for reasons unknown, and much protested by the somewhat large and very angry frame maker community, decided to ditch frame maker. They allowed and still have a Windows version that is not a terribly good application, if I say so myself, but they killed off frame maker for the Macintosh. So what was I going to do? Well, the obvious choice was InDesign, which is, in a sense, the industry standard for typographic work, particularly by independent people who don't work for large publishers. InDesign is a very, very capable application. It involves a considerable learning curve, but I mastered it, or at least the parts of it that I needed to know something about. And ever since, it has been, until very recently, the application that I've used. And like all of these pieces of software, there are things that really help someone who is visually disabled. A zoom mechanism that I can blow up the page, the words to an enormous size. And there are things that are not good. There are lots of little menus and tablets that all seem to be in the world of 7-point type and are very hard to see. But happily, the computer itself has wonderful magnification. I have to say that I am a very poor typist, and my proofreading abilities, not good to begin with, are now terrible. But I can still line up words like anybody else. With the advent of FrameMaker, the advent of InDesign, came other favorite typefaces, including Adobe Jensen that you see on the left. This was used for a number of books, beginning with the one on the right, bound for the 1890s, a collection of essays in honor of the scholar of the period, James G. Nelson. And here I had some fun with the dust jacket. There are a number of books on the shelves that are the subjects of some of the essays in the volume. Below, in alphabetical order, are works by the contributors. And then I turned one book, the green one at the upper right, upside down to see if anyone noticed. No one did. I was very disappointed. And on the left is Michael Field in Their World. And this was a group of papers that came out of a conference at the University of Delaware, edited by Margaret Stetz and Cheryl Wilson. And I show this because it is one of the first publications I made for my friend Stephen Hallowell, who runs a small independent publishing house, Rivendell Press, in the UK. And Stephen is just wonderful about, and he still is wonderful at, in a sense, putting books through the publication process. What I suspect almost no one knows is there is a Freudian slip, I'm not sure that's the right word, on the first page of the introduction, in which the word typographical is misspelled. No, I didn't notice, the editors didn't notice, the publisher didn't notice, and I suspect no one else noticed. I certainly didn't until some years later. I happened to take the book off the shelf, open to the page, and it jumped out at me. By the midpoint of the first decade of the century, I had developed a little bit of a reputation for designing publications. And I actually got commissions, which is hard to believe. The first of these was a book of essays and a bibliography in honor of the collector and particularly Sherlock Holmes scholar, Richard Lansell and Green. And this was a very, the picture does not give you an indication of the book. It was deliberately a very modest book, only about 6 inches high and rather thick. It looked like some kind of religious work from the 19th century, which was, of course, deliberate. This was followed by what I believe to be the best project and the best looking thing I've ever been involved in. A volume celebrating the anniversary of the Baltimore Bibliophiles, edited by Donald Farron and August Imholtz, who were just wonderful to work with. This was also a very complicated book that incorporated an exhibition catalog by Linda Lapides, a history of the organization itself, a list of its publications, and multiple pages in 2 columns that described every single meeting of the group since its inception. I remember going with August and Donald to the Mercantile Press here in Wilmington, Delaware, which is a large commercial firm. And I approached them because we couldn't find a printer in Baltimore that was suitable. So I thought, well, Wilmington's pretty close to Baltimore. It's, you know, it counts. And the Mercantile Press people saw this as a lark. They didn't do little small runs of book printing. But they said, okay, fine. And they said, well, we'll print it on our big press. And I thought, okay, big press, that's nice. It's a gigantic Heidelberg, about the size of a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. So we went while they were printing the book, and they print out, you know, a signature, and we look at it, say, that looks lovely. And then they press a button, and the entire printing of that signature would take about 11 seconds. It was marvelous. This is a firm that you go to when you want to print 300,000 brochures. And here they were doing this little tiny book. This book, the Baltimore Bibliophiles volume also included the first use in a book of Joseph Blumenthal's lovely Emerson typeface that Jerry Kelly had worked on for the digital version. And over the years, I've done a lot of ephemeral pieces. Perhaps my favorite is the invitation to the opening of the Mark Samuels Lasner collection at the University of Delaware Library in 2005. We were happy to have Oscar Wilde's grandson, Merlin Holland, as our guest speaker. The university provided a sample of what they intended to send out to friends of the library, to my friends, to scholars and people in the Victorian studies and book collecting worlds. And I looked at this and I thought, oh my God, this has nothing to do with, well, anything. I especially like the fact that it gave the parking information at the bottom. And I thought, oh, I can't send this out. There has to be something better. So I designed a 4-page invitation, which you see on the right. But I was very nervous because the university had, of course, a standard format for invitations to events. And I thought, oh, what will happen? So I did some little bit of backhanded conniving, communicated with higher ups in the university administration, convinced them that they should be using my invitation, not theirs, and managed to get permission to do it. I think I would have been horribly embarrassed as both a bibliophile and a typographer should the original have been circulated. I also discovered bifold greeting cards. And these you can buy in any Office Depot or Staples. You can get them from Amazon. And they are an incredible thing. They are, say that they're for, what the box says they're for, inkjet printers, but they work quite well with laser printers. And you can produce a little template in almost any word processing or publishing application. And you could print 4-page leaflets that can be used for holiday cards, and often we use them at the University of Delaware Library as keepsakes, as lists of books shown to classes, and for other purposes. And here's one for an event called Love in the Library that a number of graduate students put together from my collection. And once you do a few of these, you get a real joy of producing something at home that actually looks quite nice. And I can't tell you how many of these I've produced. It's probably in the, I don't know, the dozens or the maybe, I don't know, 100 of them over the years. But I recommend this. If you are looking for something to do on a rainy afternoon, you buy a box of these and play around with them. I've also produced a number of exhibition checklists, invitations, posters, and other things for various purposes, particularly at the University of Delaware, but elsewhere as well. I ought to say something about my style of typography. Obviously, it's derivative. I think everyone who designs anything in print or on the web has looked at lots of other examples. It isn't hard to find the sources for my particular aesthetic. I will say that, like most people who are designers, I have some idiosyncrasies. I like small capitals when used properly. I like florons and the occasional ornament. I'm not fond of sans serif typefaces. I find them hard to read. I do like old style figures. In general, my style is conservative. Someone once described it, and this was an enormous compliment, as William Morris crossed with P.J. Conkright, who was the long-lived designer for Princeton University Press. I would say it's a little more D.B. Updike, with more than a dash of too much time spent looking at the publications of John Lane, the Bodley Head, from the turn of the century. Always I have strived, because of my visual problems, for what I would describe as simplicity and legibility. If I can read it, if I can make sense of the information that's presented, then I hope others will feel the same way. I am still at it now, and the most recent work is the catalog for the Aubrey Beardsley exhibition held at the Grolier Club last year. And this is an experiment. This is was a print-on-demand book seen through production by my friend Stephen Hallowell, produced in England. This is the first time I've done a book where you can order 100 copies or 1 copy. And I think it came out pretty well. Again, it's elusive design with the help of Aubrey Beardsley. I think my career as an amateur designer and typographer has been a reasonably successful one. Little did I know when I was a child, reading, looking at books, looking at printed matter, that I would help make them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was fantastic.
Great talk.
Thank you, Mark, for the lovely things you said about the bibliophiles, and the book is still beautiful.
Thank you.
And
of course, I'm happy to answer questions.
So Mark, this is Marie in New Hampshire. I'm curious what your next project might be. And I would have us up on video, except there are too many boxes since we just moved here. We're surrounded by like about 500 boxes. It's not a very pretty sight. So
well, I mean, it's not, I have nothing to do with the design because it's the work of the extraordinary Jerry Kelly, but I've been the Marie she will not forgive me. She will ask me to do this. I'm the co-editor of a book coming out in the fall called Grow Your Club Book Plates, Past and Present. That is going to be not only informative and interesting, but a really beautiful, beautiful book. So I'm going to promote that. But I had nothing to do with the design. I don't have a project at the moment. I'll have to think of one. If I were allowed to do it, I would probably take over a number of newsletters and other things that I get in the mail that I think are plug ugly.
Well, what about your Max Beerbohm project? Will you have anything to do with the
I
design
was
of
going to
that?
ask about that.
I had to give it up.
Oh my.
Oh, well, you mean, no, we're talking about the bibliography. Okay, the bibliography I had to give up. I worked on it from 1987. Of course, between the bibliographies was the reason for getting a computer, until the early 2000s, when two things happened. One, my eyesight deteriorated and was not reliable. It was both difficult to see things, and what I would see or type was just not reliable. It's not a good thing if you're a bibliographer. The second reason was I'd been working on this, and it was something, it becomes so complicated that I actually had to write out instructions to myself on how to enter information and where things went. When I stopped, it was 1,500 typeset pages. And they were all because Max Beerbohm was a caricaturist and a theater critic and a writer. It was 98% names. The index would have been at least, I don't know what, 100 pages long. It grew and grew and grew to the point where I couldn't figure out how to finish it. I still have the files. If somebody wants, like a lifetime project, I'll send you the files.
Not volunteering.
But yes, there will be a Max Beerbohm exhibition that Margaret Stetz and I will be curating at the New York Public Library, titled Max Beerbohm, The Price of Celebrity, opening in mid-October. It will be in the small gallery on the ground floor, and we hope that thousands of people will be introduced to Max Beerbohm's wonderful caricatures and writings. No catalog, but there's supposed to be a gallery guide or handout of some kind.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. It's Matthew Kirschenbaum at the University of Maryland. We met a few years back when you visited Book Lab to plan for the APHA conference that was held there.
Yes, I remember your book, Beetle Press. Do you still have it? Or have you gone on to something more grander? Matthew?
Disappeared.
Don't know what happened.
I don't know. Will he make it back?
Odd.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. So the question I had for you, Mark, given how much of your work as a typographer has been mediated through different software systems, what kind of digital records do you keep of your own archive? Do you still have material in these old legacy formats? And would you consider that part of your personal papers, as it were, part of the record of your career as a designer? And is it the sort of thing that you could imagine passing on to those digital records? Could you imagine passing them to an archival institution, again, as part of your quote unquote papers?
Well, I'll preface my answer by saying that I think of myself often as part of the long tradition of bibliophiles who write, compile, produce, publish, design works about their collections and their interests. And as a collector, I hate to throw anything away. So I have boxes of floppy disks, which are not readable with modern computers. I have page proofs with corrections of works that had page proofs. I've got all the original photographs and illustrations used for the publications. The only thing I don't have are the original discs with the fonts, but I even have some of the original software discs. So yes, there's a lot of it still in existence.
Yeah, it's just interesting to see the way these different formats start to blend into one another once computers and software have become more pervasive throughout the industry.
Right. I actually, a couple of years ago, there was something called the Aubrey Beardsley Society, and they wanted to put the Beardsley bibliography online. And so I went and found the discs. And of course, they were in FrameMaker. And I found a PDF, but I also wanted to make some corrections through a rather laborious process. I was able to run FrameMaker in Windows, open the files, convert them to Microsoft Word, make the emendations, and then save them as PDFs. So I know that even the ancient files can be, corrected, not easily, but it's possible.
Yeah, sort of cyber bibliography.
Cyber bibliography, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I think there are a few places, Rare Book School is one, that have maintained, deliberately maintained computers running old software for this purpose.
That is true. Thank you.
I'm going to have to leave.
Hello, Mark. Hello, Margaret. Can you hear me?
Yes, Casey.
Hi, I'm just a couple blocks away. I could almost shout my question out the window. Okay, so it really came up several times in your talk. In knowing you, it's part of your personality. Can you talk a little bit about your? And I just, as you were talking, I looked on ABE to see if there were any copies of your Enoch Soames bibliography. That project, I think there were only 50 copies.
Oh no, that's a joke.
Well, I know it's a joke, but it's a joke that you made and you designed.
No, I mean the 50 copies is a joke.
Oh, that's a joke too. Okay.
Yes.
All right. How many copies are there?
I don't remember, but more than 50.
More than 50.
That
was very much like John Lane for you to do that. I like that.
Precisely. Yes.
But can you talk a little bit about maybe it comes from Beardsley, this impulse to kind of punk your reader, like with the upside down book and your playfulness, I guess.
Well, it comes more, so a little bit from Beardsley, but more from Max Beerbohm. Max Beerbohm in the 1930s had a correspondence with A.J.A. Simmons, who was the founder of the First Edition Club and was a collector, and he was creating an enormous bibliography of the writers of the 1890s. And Beerbohm wrote him a letter describing a pamphlet in considerable detail, explaining why it was written and what it was. And he goes on and describes this pamphlet. And he says, I just can't find my copy. And of course, it didn't exist at all. And I thought, well, if Beerbohm is making things up, I should make things up too. So when I was doing the Beerbohm bibliography, the second item, of course, was a description of the non-existent pamphlet. And of course, I was able to quote Beerbohm's letter at length, explaining, how, when, and why it was produced. But yes, I've given in to temptation maybe too many times in doing slightly silly things. The bibliography of Enoch Soames is a full-scale descriptive bibliography of a non-existent writer who lived from 1862 to 1897, who is the subject of a memoir in the form of a short story by Max Beerbohm. And Beerbohm describes Soames's two books of poetry, Fungoids and Negations. But Beerbohm, of course, couldn't remember the title of the third book, so that gave me some trouble in the bibliography. I was able to describe Fungoids and Negations, but I had to say for the third book, well, there's some speculation. Maybe that's a book called An Evil Motherhood by someone who wrote under the name Walt Ruding. It's been proved otherwise that Ruding existed, maybe. And of course, I included all of Beerbohm's writings about Enoch Soames and other things. And this was published to mark the centenary of Soames's death or disappearance. It was a very elaborate work. But aside from the imaginary books by Enoch Soames, for which of course I knew who the publishers were, all of the other entries, the contributions to books, the sources about Enoch Soames, the portraits and so on, all of those were real, which confused a number of reviewers. And the Rivendell Press was the publisher, and we made sure that the first copy that I had went to the Grolier Club to be cataloged so that the subject entry could be Soames, Enoch, 1862 to 1897 bibliography. Unfortunately, some librarian elsewhere put in a note into OCLC saying, I don't know how she found this out, that Enoch Soames was an imaginary writer invented by Max Beerbohm, which was really not nice. I wanted the bibliography to be of a real writer. Although I should say there are illustrations including Max Beerbohm's copy of Fungoids in the bibliography. So the colophon was part of the joke too, that says it's limited to 50 copies, but that was not true at all. So, anyway, that's more of an explanation, Casey, than probably you wanted to hear.
Mark, it's Reed Byers, and I wanted you to know that I was able to obtain the third state of fungoids that you have discussed in that book, and I was delighted to have finally found a copy of it.
And will that be in your Grow Your exhibition?
Yeah, oh yes, certainly.
Oh, good, good. I'm really pleased that it will be there. I'm not. Do you want to explain any of this, Reed, or shall we just leave people to wonder?
I think perhaps leaving a certain amount of wondering going on would be better at this point in the process. But thank you very much, Mark.
This will mean, this means I have to produce a second edition of the bibliography.
Oh my goodness.
Could I make a comment, please? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Susan Brinchison, and I've been associated for some years with the University of Delaware Library. And I just want to say that it's a great honor to have Mark Samuels Lasner involved with the library, being such a notable scholar and bibliophile, and also his marvelous collection. So thank you, Mark, for everything.
Well, thank you, Susan. It's Susan who was in many ways, the catalyst for the collection to come to the University of Delaware Library. She's my former boss.
Well, thank you so much for coming today and for giving this talk. We have any other questions? I know that we're kind of at an hour and some people might need to head out. But just thank you all so much for coming. And I hope to see you again in various future events. And yes, if we have a round of applause for Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Night, Mark.
Bye-bye.